بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing our series in the fiqh of food and drink, we finished last week all the discussion about the rulings on animals, and we mentioned last week in some detail the ruling on the meat of the people of the book in Western lands and non-Western lands, i.e. imported meat. So now, inshallah, we move to the next part of our lesson, which is the discussion of non-meat products. So non-food items, ingredients in food which are not meat. Because for the last couple of sessions we were talking about just animals, slaughter, which animals are halal, which are haram, etc. So the first thing we have to know when it comes to non-meat food, then they can be divided into different types, different groups. Firstly, non-meat items which have animal derivatives. So something which is not a meat product, but it has derivatives from a meat product. Examples, food that has gelatin, rennet, monodiglycerides, etc. Then there are food that has none of this, no animal byproducts or derivatives. Then there are foods which are pure in and of themselves, others which are, and again, they're not animals, but impure. So we're not talking about here then food that is impure but it's not animal, because we already said before impurities are haram. So leave that for outside of discussion, because then we will just spend our time. Food also which is not a meat product but intoxicates. So we're going to get to that later on. So we're talking about intoxicants or narcotics, which are obviously not meat. So that one, inshallah, we'll do separately. Things like spices and herbs. So today, inshallah, we'll focus on food that has animal derivatives. And more specifically, derivatives that are commonplace in food. So ingredients that we mostly find in our processed foods, such as gelatin, rennet, glycerides, glycerol, etc. And due to the timing, we might not be able to get into all of them. So the way that we'll do the lessons, we'll take different ingredients in different sessions so that you can remember. Because if you grouped them together, you might forget. Also, that way it becomes easier to understand why something is disputed and something else isn't. And now, before we get into the conversation, you should know, our discussion last week is very important for some of the rulings here. Because depending on the ruling of the meat of the people of the book, some derivatives can be halal or haram in your opinion. Because we said last week, if you understand the difference of opinion amongst the scholars about the meat of the people of the book today, from that same khilaf comes the derivatives from the animal which they debated about. For example, some gelatin comes from cows, bovine gelatin. The hukum on this is a fara', it's a subsidiary of the ruling on the meat of Ahl Kitab aslan. So if you don't know the ruling there, you won't be able to make the ruling here. You have to first understand, and of course as a person, come to your own decision from your own study, which view you want to hold or you believe to be most correct. Because what you find some people do, they may have a view about gelatin, rennet, etc., and in the same token, they might not understand or agree about the meat of the people of the book. But then somebody may say it's halal to eat the meat of the people of the book in this land, but gelatin is haram. That's a contradiction. Doesn't make any sense. If you understand the issue, then you understand it better. So just go back to that lesson if you missed it, so you can understand the difference there. Today we'll focus just on gelatin because of the time, and we'll focus on it in some detail. First we begin, what is gelatin? When we hear this term, we see it all the time. And many people, they hear that it's haram. Right? We hear it's haram or it's something disputed. What is it? So according to the dictionary, I'll just take one definition. It's a nearly transparent, faintly yellow, odorless, and almost tasteless substance. And its texture is like jello, right? It's very sticky. This is what it is. Colorless, tasteless, colorless, almost colorless, it has slight yellow color, tasteless and smellless, odorless. And it's obtained from boiling ligaments, bones, bones and skin. It's important. Usually it's taken from the collagen, they say. But you can also get it from bones and skin. It also appears at the end, the final formation, it's like jelly or glue. This is what it is. That's why gelatin is used as an emulsifier, to glue things together in your candies usually. واضح? Right? So if you Google it, you can see the picture of what it looks like. It's usually just sheets. In terms of the sources, and this is important to know in the beginning, the mawad, where is the sources? Gelatin has multiple sources. Mainly 4 sources. 4 types. Number 1, animal source. And when we say animal source, we're talking about animals which are slaughtered or eaten by people. 3 major ones: cows, pigs, and chicken. This is an animal source of gelatin. Cow gelatin is called bovine gelatin. So if you find this word bovine, it just means cow. For pig, it doesn't say pig, it will say porcine or porcine. Porcine. That's the one for the pig. Because some people, when they read the ingredients, they don't see it. And they say, it's not there, just they change the word. Porcine or porcine. And lastly, chicken, which is not as often used. That's animal source. Next source, fish. Fish collagen, so fish source. It will tell you if it's fish, it says clearly. Thirdly, plant source. And so plant source is important for people like us as Muslims or people of other faiths like Jews who don't eat just any meat, but also vegans. They're the ones who are also in this conversation because they worry about the source. And an example of plant source gelatin is aggar. Aggar, you might see it a lot in most candies now, and it's used a lot by vegans. Aggar is a particular substitute for even gelatin. So many times those who want to use gelatin don't want to use it at all, they use aggar. It's kind of like a sticky kind of liquid. Lastly, synthetic source. Number 4, synthetic source means it comes out of the lab. It doesn't come from any animal. Why do we have to know these 4 to begin with? Many people, when they hear the word gelatin on a particular packaging, they think asl haram. Why? Because they think it's coming from the pig. It's khata, first mistake. Because you're supposed to find out the source. So nowadays, they're more careful. They will tell you in brackets: bovine, porcine or porcine, fish, etc. With all this being said then, Ahlul Ilm, they talk about the ruling on this, depending on the ruling of where it comes from. But before we get into the rulings, what is the use for gelatin? Where do you use it? Gelatin is used in shampoos. It's used in cosmetics. It's used in puddings and pastries in order to thicken them. Candies, cakes, ice creams, and yogurts. So most of the confectionery things that we eat, the sweet things, they have connection to gelatin, which most of us, we are aware of that, because when we're young, we're taught to watch for it. واضح? Okay, now, the ruling based on gelatin divides into 2. Because the scholars, they rule on 2 different types. Gelatin which comes from halal sources, gelatin that comes from haram sources. So the first group is gelatin that comes from the halal source. What's a halal source? Of the 4 I mentioned, fish, plant, synthetic. Those 3 are halal. There's no dispute. Or gelatin that comes from an animal slaughtered according to Islamic way. For example, in the Muslim countries, they make gelatin too. We don't check their labels because it's halal. The animal slaughtered, the dhabiha way, so we eat it. Those kinds of gelatins will come from a halal source. Or an animal, like a cow, or a goat, or a chicken, slaughtered in an Islamic manner is halal. Bila khilaf. There's no khilaf there between the scholars. For example, we mentioned Majma' Fiqhi, Islamic Fiqh Council or Academy. Islamic Fiqh Academy, Majma' Fiqhi al-Islami. They said it is permissible to use gelatin that is derived from permissible sources and from permissible animals slaughtered in a legislated manner. It is not allowed, however, in their view, to use gelatin derived from skin of pigs, their bones, and other than that from the animals which are either haram or haram sources. So the second sentence they mention is when the khilaf we're going to get into. So this is taken from the Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islami, and I mentioned them the other week who they are. Collective body of scholars, the most authoritative body of scholars in the world, connected to Rabit Islami, which means the Muslim World League. If these group of scholars, when they come together all across the world, some of our biggest scholars are part of it, and when they make a qarar, a decision, it's considered internationally applicable. It means Muslim countries all across the world, they use it. That's how heavy it is. So it's not individual sheikh or from a country, it's international, or usually scholars from different regions. So they mentioned this in their sitting they had, and you can find it in Mecca Mukarramah, was done in number 85, volume 3, page 15. So very important. If you hear the Islamic Fiqh Academy said something, and they usually deal with the more recent affairs, nawazil. And I'm saying all this information to the listeners, so that when you check for new issues, check those ulama what they said. Sometimes what we do, we may check 1-2 scholars, and we forget those scholars also check what the Majma' Fiqh say. Because imagine, Sheikh Salih Fawzan, Sheikh Salih bin Humaid, all the group of scholars come together for a whole week studying something. And they come to a conclusion. How much weight does it carry? Versus only one sheikh, he might pass his ruling, and the weight is different. Not to say the sheikh's view is not taken, but you can see this one is more authoritative, so look to see it. Second group of scholars who mention the same point is the Al-Lajnatu Da'ima. And this is the Permanent Committee of Saudi Arabia, the biggest and most authoritative scholarly body in Saudi Arabia. They were asked the questions on ifta.ca or .sa, so English. Is gelatin unlawful? Answer, if gelatin is made from unlawful substance, such as pig's meat, bones, skin, or the like, it is unlawful. So they agree with the Majma' if it's this issue of pig. This is the khilaf we'll get into next. Allah exalted said, and they bring the verse, and they say, however, if the gelatin is free from any unlawful substance, there is no harm in using it. So from there we take any gelatin that comes from plant-based, fish-based, whatever else you may think of, which is halal, or halal slaughtered animal, it's halal. So hopefully this is the first point. There's no difference here. The scholars agree to it. Because if it comes from a halal source, there's no problem. We take the bones or the collagen or the skin. Now, the second group, or second type of gelatin, is the one that's derived from haram source. So from the list I mentioned to you in the beginning, source number 1, porcine, the pig source. Or non-dhabiha meat, the meat of the Ahlul Kitab. Or dead meat. These are the ones where the dispute happens. And here our scholars break into 2 groups. And the reason why we need to know this information is that unfortunately, again, when it comes to the issues of halal and haram, many people are opinionated. But they don't want to be investigative. They don't want to check. They just want to dispute. And we want to police. And what happens is, somebody may take a legitimate Islamic ruling, and then they get attacked by someone else who doesn't even know their own position. So as Muslims, we should not be this way. In issues of fiqh, you need to seek understanding first, and then when you understand, you apply the ruling, you hold the opinion you hold. But why is it important to know the khilaf, so that you see that there's many scholars on both sides. Just like last week we said, in the issue of Ahlul Kitab, their meat, we said 6 scholars at least said it's halal, and 6 scholars said it's haram. So when you tell somebody else, brother, you shouldn't eat this, just know that maybe he takes another view. At least you will be aware and more respectful in how you approach them. Tayyib, the scholars then in 2 groups. One group of scholars say gelatin, if it's derived from haram means pork, dead meat, or people of the book slaughtered meat, because they hold their meat to be permissible at present time, they say it's haram. Who are those scholars? Number 1, the Permanent Committee. I just mentioned them a second ago. The Islamic Fiqh Academy, Al-Majma' Al-Fiqh Al-Islami, I just mentioned them also. Other scholars, Sheikh bin Baz, rahimahullah, one of his fatwas, they don't use the word gelatin specifically in their fatwa, but they use the term shaham, the meat or the fat of the khinzir. It's quite equivalent. This is what's intended. Sheikh Muqbil bin Hadi al-Wadi'i, rahimahullah, also one of his fatwa on his website, and Sheikh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, in Silsila Huda wa Nur, tape 56, amongst others, where he talks about it. And there's other scholars. So at least 5 scholars, and within the first 2 committees, there's a series of scholars. They say it's not allowed. If it comes from a pork-based, or it comes from dead meat, or it comes from the meat of the people of the book. So if you see bovine gelatin, and you can't be as certain that it came from the meat of the people who actually are Ahl Kitab, i.e. properly, don't eat it. So many of us, we hear this view, we're taught this. The second view is the scholars who say it's actually permissible. And inshallah I'll explain their rationale as well as theirs. Who are the scholars who say that gelatin coming from haram source is halal? And the first thing is, there are scholars like this. Because again, some people think that this is just an opinion of some people who are careless. Right? Some people don't fear Allah, they just eat anything. Astaghfirullah azim. So as Muslims, we should not be like this. When it comes to fiqh, and any fiqh opinion, if you don't know, you ask. Because we're all ignorant, we're all learning in many ways. Number one, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen. So he had one ruling on bovine gelatin from cows. He says halal, and we're going to explain how he came to that ruling. And we translated this one before. And another fatwa, they asked him about porcine gelatin from pork. He says that's halal too. So you write that down, the pork one too. Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah held the view, Liqa'at wal-Fatawa al-Aqalliyat al-Muslimah, page 208. This is a fiqh book of fatwas of Muslim minorities. They asked this question from America, and the Shaykh answered that question. And I'm going to read from it later. Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad al-Badr, Hafidhullah, the Muhaddith of Medina, when we translated this fatwa as well, he talked about bovine gelatin, the cow one. Also, Sheikh Sa'ad al-Kathlan, right, scholar from Saudi Arabia who specializes in fiqh, he has an audio discussion on it as well as a fatwa, and he talks about it in detail. And we're going to get to it. He talked about it, even the one which is porcine, pork, he said it's allowed, if with conditions. Also, a few others, Sheikh Sulaymaan al-Majid, another scholar from Saudi, and even Sheikh Muhammad Bazmour from Saudi Arabia also, from Mecca. These scholars in particular mentioned it. So at least 5 scholars there. I believe it's 5. Yeah, 6. And so they spoke about gelatin from pork source or from beef source, from the people of the book, not the one that we know of. So at least 5 plus on the one side, another 5 on the other side. And the reason why it's important to know this opinion, because if we're going to ourselves hold one view or the other, at least we should know there are scholars from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah who hold this view. Okay. So before we get into their actual rulings, somebody may ask the question, brother, how did they come to that ruling? Because if we just said something that comes from haram then became halal, how does that work? Especially because we all consider pork to be haram. This is agreed upon. Pork is haram. So inshallah, then I'm going to present now the principles upon which they passed that fatwa. And our brother Majid was talking about usul earlier. Usul, we have to know usul. Because without it, all we have is just opinions. We don't know why the scholars have said that. طيب, so I'll introduce you then now, introduce to you two rulings, 2 principles that you keep with you inshallah. Inshallah, we're gonna. طيب. So first principle we have to know is the principle of istihalah. The principle referred to as al-istihalah. Al-istihalah is a fiqh issue, usul. So usul of fiqh, or you could say usul. Yeah, it is a part of the usul. Usul issue. It's a principle within the usul, and more to do with the subsidiary issues of fiqh. So it's not to do with usul fiqh per se, but it's a principle within the subsidiary issues. There's a principle referred to as al-istihalah. Al-istihalah literally means change. Something that changed. So the principle of istihalah states that something, if it goes through a chemical change, going from one entity to another entity, it changes the ruling. Seems clear? Something that goes through a chemical and physical change. From one entity to another entity, now it changes the ruling. We'll give an example, but we have to understand the scholars what they mention this. For example, they mentioned, many of the fuqaha, take something like pork, pig. If you take a pig and you set it on fire and you burn it, okay, and it becomes what? Ashes. Are the ashes haram now or halal? Jama'ah, what do you guys think? If you take a pig, you burn it, becomes ashes. Haram now, the ashes, or halal? Halal. Based on istihalah. Why? Because can you call that a pork or pig anymore? No. If you can't call it, doesn't take the ruling. Ibn Hazm says in Muhalla, if you change the name for it, they change the hukm. That's what, see the ulama in istihalah, they went deeper, some of them. But the asl is that. So what we see here. Why? Because ashes now are a different entity. The pig went through a chemical change. It totally changed. An example, they also give the Ahnaf, for example, the Hanafi scholars. You take a pig, you throw it into the ocean. Then, of course, over time, it's going to become like the ocean. Is it haram to drink that water? Well, you're not going to, first of all, drink the water, but let's say swim in the water. No. And why? Because everyone knows it's not there anymore. And so the ulama, they all agree to this issue of istihalah, that there is such thing as istihalah. Ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions that there is actually no debate on that. In terms, the principle is there. The debate was the application of it. The clear istihalah will bring an ayah in the Quran, chapter 16, Surah An-Nahl, verse number 66. Okay, 66 and 67. Allah says, وَإِنَّ لَكُمْ فِي الْأَنْعَامِ لَعِبْرَةً. Verily in the cow you have a lesson. نُسْقِيكُم مِّمَّا فِي بُطُونِهِ مِن بَيْنِ فَرَثٍ وَدَمٍ لَبَنٍ خَالِصًا سَائِغًا لِلشَّارِبِينَ. Allah says in the example you have in the cattle, or the cattle, a lesson, a wisdom. From its stomach, between filth and between the blood, Allah brings forth for you laban, milk, which is pure and delicious to the one who drinks it. Somebody, if to ask, where is the asl for the cow's milk? It came from where? Something between blood and something else. Is milk halal or haram? فهو halal. You don't judge the milk based on where it came. Allah then continues, وَمِن ثَمَرَاتِ النَّخِيلِ, from the fruits of the palm tree, وَالْأَعْنَابِ, and the grapes, تَتَّخِذُونَ مِنْهُ سَكَرًا. You take from these two, right? From the dates and from grapes, you take sakaran wa rizqan hasana. So Allah provides you rizq in general, but then also you get from a drink, alcohol. Wine comes from grapes. Is wine halal or haram? Somebody will say it's halal, brother, based on what we just said earlier. If we don't use the qa'idah, because it came from halal. And anyone who says that is going to be already exposing themselves if they said that. But they know it's not right. Then when it comes to this mas'ala, the scholars then said, if it came from a pork, or came from dead meat, and it became something else, you can't judge on what it became, or what it was, rather what it is. فَهُوَ الْإِسْتِحَالَةِ. And istihala is accepted in the Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala. They use the principle, let alone us. Scholars in the past, all four madhabs discuss it, and the scholars, where did they get it from? They took it from the practice, these verses, and the practice of the companions. Because the companions had the same issue. It's not only us who are dealing with it. And we'll talk more about that later, how the Sahaba dealt with these kind of issues. واضح? This is called istihala. That's the first principle. Second principle, so again, istihala, chemical and physical change. So it changes from something it used to be to something else. Physical in the sense it doesn't look like what it was. Chemical in that it literally is something else. So the scholars, some of them used to say just in the past, they didn't say chemical, they just said physical. Namesake even, the name changes. But many of our contemporary scholars, they analyzed it through the knowledge Allah gave the humans today of chemistry, and said it must also go through a chemical change. Why? Because then you can truly say it's not what it is. Example, when you burn the pork to ashes, it literally, chemically became something else. Rather, if you took something else, you just boiled it, it doesn't look like it, but still is. Chemically, right? So for example, if you take pork and you boil it for long hours, it'll change the color, it'll change the smell, but maybe it still has the essence of pig still. طيب, that's the first one, istihala. And this is mentioned by Kibar ulama, four madhabs, and outside of them, like Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Taymiyyah, Al-Shawkani, Ibn Hazm, and many. This is muhaqqiqun fi ilm, especially in usul. They mentioned it. Second one, which many people don't know about, al-istihlaak. This principle, many people, they don't know about it, or they don't pay attention to it. Al-istihlaak. Al-istihlaak, it means something najis, or something, any item, goes into something else, and it literally changes its effect by either losing its taste, its color, its scent, and i.e. its effect literally, but it's still there. But it's became absorbed into the thing. Because istihlaak means absorption or consumption. So it's something put into something else. For example, you take a small amount of urine and you put it into a big glass of water, not small one, big one. The water is way more than that small drop, so it becomes absorbed into it. So while the urine is still in the water, it doesn't have change in taste for the water, no color, no taste, nor anything, but it's still there. It didn't change chemically. So istihalah is different than istihlaak. Istihlaak, it's still there, but it changes athar. Athar is da'if, it's gone now. It's been absorbed into the product. Whereas istihalah, it went in and changed, became something else. See the difference? So when it comes to the issue of gelatin, there's two governing principles. Al-Istihalah wal-Istihlaak. And the ulama, both of them, scholars use both principles to come to the ruling. If you understand these qawa'id, then you know why they said this. Otherwise, you may tell yourself, the scholars, I don't get it, how they could rule pork within food being halal. How could that be? Well, is it clear? These two principles. Istihlaak, it's still there. It didn't disappear. But it does not affect the product, the other thing that it's mixed with. So example that could even make it clear for you, you take a big vat of milk and you put in drops of blood, small amount of blood. So the nisbah is qalila, very small. And you mix it around. Is the milk najis now or not good to drink or consume? Personally, you wouldn't consume it if you knew that, personally, but the hukum is different. The same way the scholars all agree, small amounts of najasa, if they fall into a great amount of pure thing, something tahir, it is not, the pure thing has not changed its ruling, bi-ijma'. So from there they took the qiyas for istihlaak. And istihlaak is useful because we all use it every day, but we don't know. I will get to it, examples. طيب. Now, coming back to the issue of gelatin, istihalah or istihlaak, these two principles. The scholars who said that gelatin from pork-based, porcine gelatin, or dead meat is haram, they said that even though, okay, because you have to remember, gelatin when it's poured into your sugary candies and pastries, a very small amount is put, so small. So they agree, they said that yes, you're putting a small amount of pork in there, a pork gelatin, small. However, when they did tests, they found that it did not go through istihalah. Okay, you have to understand the other side of you. The other group of scholars who said that it's halal because of istihlaak or istihalah, the other group says, true, istihalah is agreed upon principle, we agree with you. But when we did a chemical investigation of this particular gelatin in food, in candies and sweets, we found that istihalah did not happen. Okay, and who are the scholars who talked about getting chemists involved? Because somebody might be thinking, why are you talking to chemists? It's a fiqh issue. No, the ulama said the chemists can get involved because we're talking now about chemistry. And that shows you how Islam, when it comes to rulings, the ulama, they bring in the specialists. They don't just sit back by themselves, as some people would assume, passing rulings in closed doors. Sheikh Nasr, Sheikh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, when discussing this issue, he said, I'm not an expert in chemistry, so we'll bring the chemist, and the chemist spoke, and they based the ruling on what he was saying. He said, based on what our brother said now, if this is the case, then it's halal, if not, it's haram. And why is that important? Because the chemist is going to tell you about the istihalah, because chemical change. Alright? And to bring you more proof, I found a study, okay, it's a Muslim study, just in case you were doubtful. A group of Muslim scientists in Malaysia, they did a study of gelatin found in food products in the Muslim world or otherwise. And they did a study chemically, and they talked about istihalah first, and they talked about the ulama who said it, and then they came to a conclusion saying, it suggested that what they found the conclusion, that the gelatin only transforms physically, not chemically. Because of that reason, istihalah method in gelatin cannot be fully accepted. So these are scientists, Muslim scientists who studied it, 2011 paper. They took some examples and they did the example. They put the gelatin into some sugary liquids and whatever, and they found that it doesn't go to chemical change. So some of our scholars, they understood and they agreed to this point. For example, Sheikh Sa'ad al-Kathlan, who said that it's permissible. He also said that there has been conversations that the pork gelatin doesn't go through istihalatul kamila. It doesn't go through complete istihalah. So in that case, he says, if this is the case from what has been discussed, فَهُوَ مُحَرَّمْ, or he says, تَكُونُ مُحَرَّمَ وَلَا يَجُوز. He says himself, who still holds the view that if this is the case, from that angle, it's haram. So from one angle, the group of scholars who say that istihalah is agreed upon principle, but not in reality, they have an argument. But the other group of scholars, they say, طيب, while that's true, istihalah isn't chemical change necessarily. Usuliyun, when they talk about istihalah, they never, until recent, use the term chemical. They use the term more loosely. So the first response to the other group is that it's wrong to use that understanding. Because istihalah, if you look what the ulama they say, they mention that it's just a change in the a'yan, change in the name and entity. Why must it be chemical? So for example, if I change the name of something, I change its ruling. Al-hukm an shay, the ruling on something is based on what? Its actual essence. So if ayn, it's not called pork, it means something else. If it's something else, al-asl fi ta'am or al-at'imah hil. That's how they argued. But to be honest, that is a dispute that you might find even big scholars, they don't really get into. Some scholars may say that istihalah doesn't have to be chemical, but truth be told, even the scholars who say that it is permissible to eat food that has porcine gelatin, they don't even try to dispute that. Because chemists are coming, professionals, experts are coming and saying that it didn't really change. It's hard to then try to change the definition, right? That's not the most appropriate. So they say then, the answer then, it's halal bi istihlaak. And that's more correct. So the reason about porcine gelatin from pig is halal, min bab or min janib al-istihlaak, not istihalah. This is stronger and more established. And therefore, the scholars who argue, they mention this. And I'll give you now the example, istihlaak. So next time someone wants to ask you to explain why it's halal, you explain that while the small amount of pork gelatin is in the candy, the vat of the sweets, it's so small amongst the tahir, it does not have any athar. فهو halal, because just like if I put a small amount of urine in a big swimming pool, it has no effect, and we all agree to that. It's a qiyas. So who held this, who discussed this? Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen. In the same kitab, لقاءات والفتاوى الأقليات المسلمة, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen was asked a question: if a haram substance like shuhum al-khinzir, like the fat of pigs, is absorbed into something, what's the hukum on it? Like you take some rennet, and we'll talk about rennet next week, into some cheese that's made. Is the cheese halal? So cheese, inshallah, we'll talk about next week. But he says, لا بأس بأكلها. No harm in eating it. لأن عبرة بالأكثر كما لو سقطت النجاسة في ماء ولم يتغير فإنه يكون طاهرا. The Shaykh says no harm in eating it because the consideration is for the large amount of milk and curd that's used, or milk that's used before that is put in. Just like if you have a large amount of water to which some najasa fell in, it doesn't affect. And then he brings a nice point, which we'll mention more next week. وَلِهَذَا كَانَ الصَّحَابَةَ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى عَنْهُمْ يَأْكُلُونَ مِنْ جُبْنِ الْمَجُوسِ. And it's a very strong point that we have to consider. The Sahaba رضي الله تعالى عنهم used to eat the cheese made by fire worshippers. Sahaba, they fear Allah, they have more knowledge than us. So sometimes when we look at our wada' today, our climate, we must ask ourselves the key question. Being fearful of Allah is very important, but we also need to consider how our early generation dealt with it. Then the Shaykh explains more, and he comes to the conclusion. He says then that if there's rennet in the pork rennet or porcine rennet within the particular food, it's halal bishart an la yu'athir. It doesn't have any effect. It doesn't make clear a taste or scent in this cheese. And this is according to the qawaid, right? Even though someone would dislike eating pig anyways, but this is the ruling, it's a different issue. So here Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen ruled on based on istihlaak. Another point, Shaykh Sa'ad Kathlan, who also held the view, he also mentioned in another fatwa that if istihlaak occurs in this particular issue, it becomes halal, and then he connected to the issue of alcohol. The same, he says, if like alcohol and medicine. Now some of us may ask the question, how about alcohol in medicine? Because this is the point where you connect the two subjects. The same group of people who may say that gelatin in food, i.e. sweets, is haram, may still use cough syrup that has alcohol. And we may ask them, why different rulings here? And some of them, they don't even realize there's alcohol in their cough syrup. So that's the first problem. You have checked your label. It's there. We have istihlaak on both sides. And so what happens, you see, and I'll show you, brothers, inshallah, next week, it's not so black and white when people say it's halal or haram, because even the ulama have courtesy of mentioning the khilaf from the beginning. They understand. And I'll give you now the example. Cough syrup, medicines, vitamins, a lot of them have gelatin, and many of them also have alcohol. A good amount, or at least a noticeable amount. No alim we know, as far as I know, said that cough syrup is haram. As far as I know, they say it's permissible. And they come from the angle that whatever a small amount is in there, it's used not for drinking, but for preservation. And it's used for, sometimes, usually preservation, to keep a shelf life long. For what halal? Bab istihlaak. Because the illah for tahrim of alcohol is the intoxication. There's no intoxication in the cough syrup. Even if you drank the whole bottle, you probably get a seizure or something before, because there are different effects of it. But even then, those people who are doing that, they're even going against the guidelines. The doctors told you to take a spoonful, first of all, when you're sick, and they say that it's used, small amount is there. Now, we may say that some cough syrups have a lot. That's a different chapter. Now, I'll give you the example. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin was asked in the same book, Liqa'at wa Fatawa, Aqalliyat al-Muslimah, page 208. He said, Shaykh, there is some gelatin, which the people they refer to as gelatin, which is taken from the bones of pigs, their meat and their fat, and also from dead meat. And this is taken from the slaughterhouses. And then it's used in many issues, and many products like medicines, and it's used also as the covering for the capsules of vitamins. And then they mentioned to Shaykh some examples of vitamins. And the question then says, is it this particular material or product, the source that we have, is it necessary to use it for the need for cures or to consume it? But considering that the amount that is covering the capsule is small. And then they also ask the Shaykh about if it changes, it goes through that chemical change. Shaykh says first, we should know that it's a small amount that is being used of porcine gelatin. It's only used for tajbeen faqat aw lil hifz. It's used for emulsifying and it's used for preservation. فهذا لا بأس. There's no harm because the Sahaba also, and he mentioned the same point, they ate the cheese. What is important? Shaykh Uthaymin is talking about the porcine gelatin, exact one where the khilaf ulama had, because the Shaykh understood that it's used for preservation, another use. That's why the amount is so small. If someone were to say, why are they putting alcohol or gelatin in the candy in the first place? They don't want you to taste it, they want it to stick. This is what it's for. It's not supposed to be for taste. And if you look carefully, then you notice, and this is a fara' issue that will come another time, how about alcohol that's used as a carrier, and not a intoxicant? It's actually an issue that's come now in the health industry. But we'll get to it another time. So the conclusion, the Shaykh says, that point. Then he says, as for the capsules, his opinion, Shaykh says, for vitamins, they have this kind of gelatin, because it's used as a capsule that goes into your stomach eat. He says this is a large amount, la tajuz, it's not permissible. He says it's not allowed. The vitamins, which they have, the pork-based gelatin, because he says it is jurmun kabir. It's a large amount, or covering, and this is not allowed. And then they asked him again, he said yes, it's not allowed. Because he said in his opinion, you're directly taking it. Of course, there's a dispute on that as well, about vitamins, and they have the covering of the capsule is gelatin. Alhamdulillah, even though this opinion is there, and this is a strong view because it's actually a lot or it's present, there's gelatin-free vitamins. So you can Google it, Jameson or this company or others, they have halal or they have gelatin-free vitamins. And just in case someone was worried about the multivitamins, you can find it. It's there, alhamdulillah. So the Shaykh differentiated between the two. So then another fatwa was asked about something else. طيب. Coming back now to the issue, so if we agree then by way of istihlaak, then we can then take a look at those who say that it's haram. The argument is by way of istihalah, and they have a strong argument because of the worry that it didn't go through, and also because it's wara', it's God consciousness and scrupulousness to stay away. So we would say the scholars who argue that if it goes to istihlaak, therefore it becomes halal because you're using only a small amount. This argument was mentioned, as I mentioned, at least 5 different scholars. But if someone still is not comfortable with it, then do not engage in it. Alhamdulillah, there are alternatives. Gelatin-free yogurt, readily available. Gelatin-free candy, very available. Because someone will say, which candies have gelatin? Most of the ones that you eat don't have it. You can Google it. Even the famous brands, they don't have. And if you find them that some of them they have, then you can investigate. Because that's the last point we want to get into. If someone holds the view that the gelatin is haram if it comes from haram sources, they may say, how do I know the haram source? So the advice would be, check the label and check online or call them if you take the view that it's not allowed. But if you hold the view that it's allowed by way of istihlaak, then you can engage in it. But if you find gelatin free, فَهُوَ أَحْسَنُ, this is better. وَالْأَحْوَطِ, and safer. And we already said before, خُرُوج مِنَ الْخِلَافِ أَوْلَى. Getting out of the khilaf is always best. Because, especially at home, if you bring this home and someone will say this has gelatin, do you want to argue about it and discuss it, or do you want to avoid the discussion? Especially if you don't know the issue, because you may say, "Now, brother Faisal told us halal." I'm not telling you what to do. You have to study the issue and review what I said. But you may go home and say, "Now I'm going to eat this," and someone asks you in your home, "What are you doing?" And you say, "Well, it's halal and that's it. I don't know how to explain it." That's not appropriate. You also want to be wise and say, "What about the people in my family who don't know any better? I don't want them to be in shock." If I hold the view because I hold it, then you defend it, you discuss it. And you can eat it and they don't have to eat it. That's another thing. They don't have to force people to eat it. And lastly, when it comes now to the Muslims, and I mentioned the last point to end with, advice for the Muslims as well. When it comes to dealing with these masail, now that we see it's a khilaf based on usul, and many scholars are discussing it, we need to be much more careful in how we discuss with people. If somebody holds the views it's not permissible to engage in, we should have also consideration not to force them to recant their view. It's not adab. They have kibar ulama who hold the view. The same if you hold a view and someone comes and approaches you to advise you, they're coming from a good place. So you accept their advice and you can continue to engage in it. Because you believe it's halal. You don't have to listen to them, but they have the right to make the inkar, to advise you because they want good for you. Deen nasiha. But some people, they take offense to it. Right? You should be nice when you talk to people about it. Lastly, as Muslims, we should not be doing as we do nowadays, which is saying it's haram without any consideration for a difference of opinion and without adab. And I want to finish with this point because, again, some people, they try to shame others. So, for example, somebody may be eating some type of chips that have cheese, and that's for next week's discussion. And the same people wouldn't even know that the ingredients change in the product, which they say it's halal, haram. The person may hold the view it's haram based on this other issue of the cheese, which the Sahaba used to eat. And then somebody may be criticizing them. And little does the other person who's criticizing know that the ingredients change, and go online, you can see it. And I'll show you next week. So amazing. This etiquette of being respectful is being lost because some people are being taught that you just stick to those points and they're then becoming aggressive. If you're blind following an opinion, first of all, without you studying it, you're not in the proper academic position to tell someone else what to do. But if a person only wanted good for you and they didn't know any better, this is a khilaf, and this is important for us, we should understand the position of the person, then you have mercy, you don't react aggressively either. Because we remind ourselves, especially what Allah said, وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَا تَصِفُ أَلْسِنَتُكُمُ الْكَذِبِ هَذَا حَلَالٌ وَهَذَا حَرَامٌ لِتَفْتَرُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبٍ. So Allah reminds us in the Quran about this kind of behavior, just going around halal and haram. We have no idea. And this is becoming very noticeable online as well. People making halal, haram online, they don't know what they're talking about. Policing or abusing others. Allah says, and say not concerning that which your tongues put forthly falsely. This is lawful and this is forbidden, so as to invent lies against Allah. Verily those who invent lies against Allah will never prosper. So be careful what you're also telling people, and do your own research to check what the scholars actually said. One last piece of advice as well. Since these issues have more detail than meets the eye, the Muslim, when they study them and they understand them and they take a particular view, they are allowed to practice that which they see to be most close to the truth, provided that they study the issue and sincerely for Allah's sake. Not the easiest view. Because when this issue first comes to people, and they hear some ulama say it's permissible, that's it, khalas, wa huwa halal. That's all I needed to hear. How many scholars? What's their names? Where can I find it? It's because they want to do this anyways. The same scholars, they say you have to have taqwa, be fear Allah and be careful. So for example, last week's discussion about the meat of Ahlul Kitab, we have lots of halal meat. Support the Muslims. Why get into that mawdu'? When you know there's an alternative, it's better for the community and better for your consciousness and your deen. Because the one is doubtful, the other one's clearly halal. Same thing, if you know now there's some kind of discussion, if you still think it'd be halal, but you find one that's gelatin free, for example, it's safer for your nafs. What about if you don't know you don't know the ingredients or the ruling about it? i.e. it says gelatin or doesn't say, or I can't ascertain. Then that's another final rule. If someone doesn't know the ruling on something, the origin, I'm talking about non-food items, not meat items, and ingredients, the origin is permissibility. So if you go and you buy a shampoo, you don't know what's in it, because you took into consideration is this shampoo, or about this yogurt I didn't know, or about this particular vinegar I didn't know, I'm just going to eat it. Even though, generally, if they check the ingredients, you still can't tell, the asl is halal to prove otherwise. But the Muslims should not be that careless, just taking anything and saying for halal, because there's also a lot of ability for them to find out. طيب, inshallah, next week we'll talk about a discussion then on the next one that's connected to this, which is rennet. And then inshallah we'll also take from there other ones. And we already mentioned the vitamins issue. And that shows you that creams are also on the table. Discussion about those and other products as well. Bidnillah, we'll end with this much inshallah. If anyone has any questions, we'll take from them inshallah. Now.
Are there any treatises or works that a person can look into this matter further or references?
There are some, alhamdulillah, resources and references. Someone can study this further. In terms of English, I did not find too many, besides some of the fatawa of the ulama and some of the research about the chemistry that I was citing. So this would be, inshallah, something we can share maybe at the end, that which we found in different sources and translations so they can benefit from. Because in English you'll find just some rulings, but not the scholarly discussions. So inshallah that could be something which we try to bring forth at the end, because it's helpful for the Muslim to go back and to review. Bi-idhnillah ta'ala. Yes?
If gelatin is used as an emulsifier, technically when a food that you're using gelatin in becomes like a jello or like a candy that's kind of squishy, doesn't that technically mean that the gelatin, one of the attributes of the gelatin is still apparent? Because it is the reason for which that the candy has become like chewy.
So the issue then is that because gelatin is used as an emulsifier, and it helps the texture of the product. Doesn't mean its effect is there. No, because the gelatin we're talking about is from pork. So the taste, the color, and the scent of that gelatin, of that pork, which is supposed to be in that gelatin, does that make itself apparent in the food? And the answer is no. So the gelatin is the discussion that gelatin by itself, even if it wasn't from pork, it's allowed. But when it's from pork, the idea is that it has something in the pork with it. If we were to put it into a big pot of sweets, the idea is the taste, the color, and the smell is gone. Texture might be there because gelatin, but texture is not one of the things to show that it's there. In fact, you may even argue that because it has other things in it, you can't even ascertain that. So the athar is gone, because when you smell it, you taste and you eat it, you would not be able to tell it's there. On top of the fact that the amount of other things that were in it. And remember, it's only one of the many enzymes that are going there. So artificial flavors and sucralose and glycerin, etc., all go in there. So how could you tell? That's the issue. So when the ulama, when they say istihlaak, there's actually a good argument for it, especially if you Google and research about how cheese is made, how big the vat of milk is, and how small amount the rennet is. It's unbelievable. Because it's used again to start the catalyst for the curding, but you could not tell which part has which, and it's mixed vigorously. So there's a strong case there. And like I said, the istihlaak also is helpful because of the other issue of the medicine. So we use it anyways, to be honest. But that's what they mean when they say it no longer has an effect. Same with alcohol. Even though it might be present still, I can't taste it, I can't smell it, I can't. So therefore, as if it's not there. Naam. Yes, Akhi, you had a question?
Mine was for istihalah and istihlaak. Which one referred to the change and which one referred to the...
So that's good. So different between istihalah and istihlaak. Istihalah is the chemical and physical change from one entity to another. Istihlaak is that it's still there, just that its effects, either its scent or its taste or its color, it doesn't make apparent because it's overcome by other large amounts of pure or whatever else in it. So difference istihalah, the thing is no longer there, it changed. Istihlaak is there, but it's weakened, it's been overcome. So therefore, you may find sometimes, in many cases, why is alcohol used, ethanol or ethyl alcohol? Why is it used in all these food products we have? Because it preserves the shelf life. So if you take, for example, even something random, like you might find, like some even mentioned, even some sodas have it. A lot of things have it. But such a small amount just to keep it all around. So if you were to drink and eat it, you would have no idea until someone said, brother, it has something in there. And that shows you that even if it's there, it lost its effect. Whereas the other one, it's as if it's not there because it changed. So istihala, thing changed. Istihlaak, it's absorbed. That's the better way to understand it. Now, any other questions? Yes.
Is it true that gelatin has some negative effects on health?
So the question is, gelatin, does it have negative effects on one's health? The scholars, when they discuss it, they say that gelatin itself, it has different kind of uses, but in terms of its health benefits, it's more to research. Wallahu a'lam. Because I don't know if it's particularly unhealthy to consume a lot of it, but even the amount of you consume is very small. All right, so Wallahu a'lam, that one for some of us to research maybe the health benefits. Brother says, what is the position in Scientific Academy on gelatin? They take the view that it's not allowed. They take the view, like Sheikh Ibn Baz and the permanent committee, that it's not allowed. So Majma' Fiqh is on the side that it's not allowed from haram sources. As for halal sources, they all agree. طيب, inshallah. So next week, inshallah, we'll continue on talking about rennet and also other kinds of ingredients we find. And inshallah, the benefit of these kind of discussions is easy. Then when next time you go and grocery shopping or you're discussing food, you have now more awareness and ilm about the food that you eat, because Islam is a deen of religion, and it makes your life easier to know the qawa'id, because we thank Allah for it. Islam has come to make our life easier and principled. Otherwise, we'll be between two extremes. One, which is some religions have, which is too much rules and excessiveness, which makes it hard to live by. And the second group, which is excessive leniency, which you can't have any guidance. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Subhanakallah bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.